In 2017, I was looking to buy an apartment in Chicago, Illinois. After a long search, I decided to buy a unit downtown from an acquaintance. This person said they needed to sell quickly for personal reasons and offered a very good price. The apartment was in a relatively old building, but the unit itself had been renovated to look quite modern, clean, and well equipped. I am Liam, name changed. Someone who lives quite independently and enjoys the privacy of my own apartment. I felt optimistic about a fresh start here. I moved my belongings in, arranged everything. A few days later, while having a casual chat with an elderly neighbor in the building, I accidentally learned something that sent shivers down my spine. The neighbor told me that the apartment I had just bought, a few months prior, had been the scene of a tragedy. A young girl, the previous tenant, had hanged herself right in this apartment. This detail wasn't widely publicized, but those who had lived in the building for a long time knew. That information hit me like a cold shower, dampening my initial excitement. The feeling of owning a private space suddenly came with an unshakable sense of unease. This place, where I was eating, sleeping, living, was where a life had ended so tragically. That night, after turning off all the lights and lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, I started to feel that something was wrong. Not the usual noises of an old building, but a strange silence, a heavy feeling in the air. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I looked towards the bedroom door, facing the living room, and then, I saw her, a blurry, ethereal figure, floating in midair. It was a young girl, looking to be in her 20s. She wasn't standing on the floor, but hovering about a meter above the ground. Moving slowly, she glided across the living room, silently, making no sound. Her long black hair hung down, obscuring part of her face. My entire body froze in terror. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe deeply. My rational mind screamed that it was just an illusion, the shadow of furniture in the dark. But a deep part of me knew it wasn't true. It was a person, a young girl, hovering right there in my apartment in the darkness. I mustered all my strength, reaching a trembling hand towards the bedside lamp switch on the nightstand. My fingers fumbled for the switch. Finally, I managed to turn on the light. The sudden yellow light illuminated the room. I immediately looked towards the living room. No one was there, only the familiar furniture. I gasped for air, cold sweat breaking out. I sat up in bed, panting, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Hallucination? Tiredness? A reflection from outside? But there was no light from outside that could create such a shape. The horrifying feeling was real. I knew I had just seen something that didn't belong in this world. Right inside my own apartment. Seeing the floating ghost girl wasn't a one-time occurrence. It recurred, not every night, but frequently enough to shatter my peace. Almost any time I turned off the light and was alone in the apartment at night, I could see her. She usually appeared in the living room or the kitchen, dining area. The more spacious areas of the apartment, always hovering about a meter above the floor, slowly drifting from room to room. Sometimes, she would pass through walls, as if they didn't exist. Sometimes, she would stop in midair, motionless, as if looking at something I couldn't see. She was always silent, no footsteps, no other sounds, just that ghostly presence, drifting in the darkness. Her figure was blurry, somewhat translucent, but her body shape was still clear. Along with these sightings came other signs of the haunting. The temperature in the apartment was often unusually cold, especially in certain areas. Regardless of the heating, the feeling of being watched, as if someone was looking at me from another room, was constant. Occasionally, I would hear very faint, hard to identify sounds, a slight rustling, a creak from the ceiling, or a very faint, high-pitched whine. I tried to explain everything scientifically, logically. Perhaps the ventilation system in the old building caused the cold drafts and strange noises. Perhaps the stress was causing me to hallucinate. But seeing the figure of the girl floating, that was something I couldn't explain away. I tried talking to the acquaintance who sold me the apartment, hinting at strange things. They seemed evasive, only saying that the previous girl had mental health issues and that the apartment perhaps just had some lingering, bad energy. Their dismissiveness made me feel more isolated with my growing fear. The apartment I bought for a fresh start had become a terrifying trap. The haunting didn't stop at the girl just drifting around. Gradually, the disturbances became clearer and seemed directly related to the cause of her death. The ghost girl appeared more often, and sometimes, she hovered closer to me. I saw her features more clearly, the clothes she might have been wearing on her last day. Her long black hair hanging down. Her face was still pale. Her eyes wide open, but her expression was blank, full of despair. Sounds related to hanging became more prominent. I heard a creak from the ceiling, right above my head, like the sound of a heavy weight being suspended. This sound usually occurred at night, when everything was quietest, making me afraid to look up at the ceiling. Sometimes, I also heard a faint scraping sound, like rope or something being rubbed. The feeling of being watched became heavier and more focused. I felt like someone was looking down at me from above, especially when I was in the living room, where she was rumored to have hanged herself, although I couldn't see a clear injury. When the ghost girl hovered closer, I caught a glimpse of a faint mark or discoloration around her neck area. This further confirmed that she was the spirit of the girl who died by hanging. I started fearing the ceiling, fearing the space above my head. The thought of her ending her life right here, hanging in the air, and her spirit still being stuck, forever floating in this space, sent shivers of terror down my spine. My fear compelled me to research the girl who committed suicide and what led to her death. I searched online news archives in Chicago, looking for news reports related to the building address or the date of the suicide. Searching for obituaries, social media profiles of the girl, name changed to Emily Carter. I found a few small articles confirming the incident, her name, and the apartment where it happened. Emily Carter, 25, was found dead in her apartment. The cause was suicide by hanging. Not many details were publicly released, but some online forums about strange stories in Chicago mentioned this apartment in Emily's case, saying she had struggled with severe depression and complex personal issues. Knowing her name and age, seeing her picture, from old social media, made the fear more personal. Emily was no longer an anonymous ghost. She was a real person, with a real tragedy, and that tragedy was haunting the very place I was living. My research into Emily seemed to provoke her spirit further. The disturbances in the apartment became more intense and desperate. The ghost girl appeared more frequently, sometimes hovering right inside my bedroom. The creak from the ceiling sounded like rope straining under a terrible weight. The scraping turned into frantic scratching. Unpleasant smells appeared more often, not just coldness, but also a suffocating smell. The smell of rusty metal. The smell of despair. The feeling of being watched was no longer just from the ceiling, but from everywhere in the apartment. The haunting reached its peak of interaction and violence. The ghost girl no longer just drifted. She started performing terrifying actions. seemingly replaying the final moments of her life or wanting me to feel her despair. As she hovered closer, I saw her face more clearly, pale, gaunt, her eyes wide but lifeless, her expression full of torment and utter despair. I caught a glimpse of a bruise or faint scar around her neck area. A horrifying mark of death. The sounds from the ceiling became intense and real. The creaking was terrifyingly loud. The scratching sounded like frantic clawing at the ceiling. And most horrifying was the sound of gasping, choking, desperate struggling for air, all echoing from above, or directly from her floating form. Sometimes, I felt an invisible pressure weighing down on my chest and neck, making it hard to breathe, as if I was being strangled. This sensation was accompanied by a bone-chilling coldness and a strong smell of rusty metal. Objects in the apartment were moved violently, especially in the living room area, where she was believed to have hanged herself. Chairs were knocked over. Pictures on the wall fell. Doors opened and closed violently by themselves. The ghost girl seemed to be trying to convey something to me. Not with clear words, but with this horrifying reenactment. She wanted me to understand her pain, her despair, her suffocation, and her final moments. Or perhaps, she wanted me to go with her, seeking release or simply wanting company in this ghostly imprisonment. The sight of her floating, her eyes staring directly at me, was utterly terrifying. I knew she was trying to pull me into her spiral of despair. That night, the haunting reached its most horrible climax. The sounds of the hanging echoed throughout the apartment, so real that I felt as if I was right there, witnessing or experiencing it. The ghost girl hovered directly above me, so close I could feel the cold air radiating from her. Her face, pale and distorted by death, stared down at me. I felt a terrible pressure around my neck, choking me, as if she herself, or her haunting power, was trying to strangle me, making me feel her final sensation. I thrashed, trying to fight back, but it was a battle against something invisible, against a tragedy that had already happened. In utter panic, I screamed. The scream tore through the air. Perhaps that scream interrupted her loop, or perhaps I resisted hard enough to temporarily push her away. Suddenly, the pressure around my neck vanished. The sounds fell silent. The ghost girl's figure disappeared. I lay there, panting, trembling, in the darkness. I didn't dare stay in that apartment for another minute. That very night, I left, abandoning everything. The place that was once a symbol of a fresh start had become the embodiment of a haunting tragedy. I never returned to that apartment again. I sold it, taking a significant financial loss. But I know, I didn't completely escape it. The haunting of the floating girl, the creaking from the ceiling, the feeling of being strangled, the desperate face of Emily Carter, will haunt me for the rest of my life. I am afraid of apartments, afraid of high ceilings, afraid of empty spaces above my head. Sometimes, I still catch a glimpse of a blurry figure in my peripheral vision, or feel a sudden cold draft somewhere. This story is true. It is what I experienced in that apartment in Chicago. It taught me that death, especially tragic death, can leave a horrifying, haunting energy behind, keeping spirits tied to the place where they ended it. Emily Carter's spirit is still there, trapped in the apartment, forever floating between two worlds, perhaps still seeking release or someone to pull along with her. If the story of the floating ghost girl sent shivers down your spine, if you believe in true horror, souls trapped by despair and tragedy, and apartments holding terrifying secrets, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next videos. There are many other horrifying secrets waiting to be told.